What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Well, it's crossover time with Javier Reyes of Locked On Padres to discuss, is the NL West becoming a two-team race? And where does Corbin Burnes to the Dbacks land on most surprising contracts of the last 20 years?
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Miller Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, MillerThomas24.myportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, without further ado, to discuss the NL West and the most surprising contracts of the last 20 years, we got to do it with a little crossover. So without further ado, let's bring on Javier Reyes of Locked On Padres. Boop, boop, boop. How you doing today, sir?
Doing great, man. Doing great. Hanging in there. Some good football developments this past weekends. Very excited about that. And Happy New Year. I know that we're still, we're kind of past it. What do you have a certain time when you're like, all right, we could stop saying Happy New Year? Or is it because I go on a first time seeing someone since the New Year basis. That's what I usually do.
I don't feel like I don't have the exact thing. I feel like by the third day of January, I'm good. I've heard enough Twitter, social media, TV. I'm good. All my family's called me.
That's the right answer. Yeah, that's the correct answer. Just be like, by the third, I think we're good after that. But
I like your bit. Maybe just keep your bit going the first time you see someone. So I don't care if it's January, October, June. If it's the first time I see you this year, so I'm going to say, hey, man, Happy New Year, man.
Happy 2025, man. 2026, whatever it's, if I see someone in September. Yeah. But doing good, man. It's been, I feel like we're officially hitting a little bit of the lull period of the offseason. But I think what's so exciting is that there's still a lot of really big impact players. And I'm excited to talk about that. And especially the state of the NL West, man, because I know you must have just been through the roof. Oh my goodness, man.
It's been a minute since we've talked here, Javi.
I texted you immediately when it happened.
It was late. I was sitting at my kitchen table in New Jersey. It was 1:30 a.m. when we saw the Jeff Passan bomb, because all you see, of course, across the Twitter ticker on your iPad is Corbin Burnes, 6 years, 210. The team is always last. So it's okay, breaking news. Corbin Burnes, you see the money. Where is he going to go? Arizona Diamondbacks, baby.
Yeah.
We did it. And so now we had to bring you on to discuss, because the Padres are a team, AJ Preller, they've been one of the most aggressive teams offseason, trade deadline, the last few years. But when looking at the offseason so far, we know the Dodgers are out there bringing back Teoscar, signing Blake Snell. The Dodgers are doing what the Dodgers are doing, right? The D-backs trying to keep pace with them. We know this is one of the best teams in baseball in terms of putting their payroll back, or putting their revenue back into their payroll. And they're doing that, getting Corbin Burnes, trading for Josh Naylor. Those two teams are really solidifying themselves in this NL West race. But how about those San Diego Padres, Javi? What is their plan of action? We're still waiting for a big move. They're a team where I'm not going to just sit here and act like they're not going to do anything all offseason, because we know Preller is not afraid to get aggressive and make a move. But why haven't we seen anything yet? What do you expect? Where are the Padres missing? When are we going to see the ball drop for San Diego?
I think it really is we just have to see what happens with Roki Suzaki. I think if you start seeing teams, the teams that are probably still in it will be the ones that you see not spending their international free agency money. So if you start seeing, let's just make one up, let's say the Cubs, if you start seeing them spending a lot of it, that probably means Roki isn't necessarily going there. But I think that that's what they're really hitching a lot of their wagon to. It feels like that would be, if there's going to be a big move, that's it. And that was even before I thought that they might spend at least a little bit, just because of how successful the season was. That ownership might have been you know what, maybe you can go out and get a Tyler O'Neill type of deal. You know what I mean? One that's like not long-term, not huge, but something. And I still think that they have players out there. I still think that they're going to sign a catcher, whether it be Yasmani Grandal or Elias Diaz, who's with the team last year. I think they'll still do stuff like that. But clearly they're in a financial situation where they genuinely have some issues, especially, I mean, for people who don't remember, we're not going to talk about it now, but the whole Bally Sports fiasco.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, your team has obviously still decided to keep spending, but there are some actual genuine financial issues with the team that they have to sort out a little bit before they like go all in and start giving all these huge contracts again. But I think it's Roki Suzaki, but the biggest thing outside of that will be trades. I think that Luis Reyes, 14 million, clearing that up and just getting younger, controllable players is what they need. They're not going to trade Luis Reyes for a junior Caminero, Jackson Holiday type of prospect, but talked about on my Friday show some trades. Everybody could go check that out. Just backup guys who can fill out a rotation, who could fill out maybe a piece of the bullpen that he might lose. Robert Suarez, he makes 10 million this year. He has an opt-in. You get rid of that contract. Really high quality reliever who was an all-star last year. Maybe you get some stuff out of that, right? As much as Padres fans would like to trade Jake Cronenworth, I don't think that's happening. That dude is signed until, I believe, 2031. So that's not happening, even if the AAV isn't that bad. I don't see that happening. And it's, it could be worse. So I think the Padres, a lot of what's going to happen is trades. And in fairness, this is a team that last year, the biggest thing they did was trading away their best player. Now, I'm not saying that you can straight gold like that again, where you get Jerks and Profar, a starting left fielder for $1 million. Like, that's just not something that's replicatable. That's something that you could count on, or even Kyle Higashioka or Donovan Solano. But in fairness, remember that they still have a lot of star power. So the positive spin is they should be a team that's like, let's just make look, we just need depth because we have the stars. Tatis is a player who could literally just go out and be worth 8 wins.
Yeah.
And it could be similar to the Mariners where it's like, you know what? That's enough for you to be a contending team or at least in the playoff mix. And that's kind of all they need. So that's what they're hoping for. I don't think that guys like Cease are going to be on the move. I know that John Heyman reported if they get Roki Suzaki, they may be open to moving him. I think that he would be the player that it depends on if you can trick teams. You know what I mean? Can you get the Orioles? They're getting a lot of crap right now. Can you get like a decent amount of prospects in return for him? Maybe. But regardless, it has been slow though, man. It has been slow, and it's especially been rough considering that not just the Dodgers with the 7 players that they've acquired, but also the Giants and your D-backs doing a lot. I can understand why Padres fans are especially frustrated.
Yeah, so does that make you nervous that you feel like all your eggs are in the Roki Suzaki basket? Because we know the Dodgers, the Giants are all going to be in on him. I feel like the D-backs' chance of getting him are probably the lowest of any team, but they're still very interested. We know up to like 20 teams are going to be in on Roki. We know the money does not matter. It's basically going to come down who has the best pitch and where he wants to go. And so let's say theoretically the Padres don't land him. Is this a franchise that still looks at next year as a potential all-in window to try and win the World Series? Or do you look at the, other teams in the NOS with the Dbacks and Dodgers and say, let's take a step back next year and try to retool potentially for 2026? We're talking about Luis Reyes expensive. You're going to have to figure out what to do with Dylan Cease. Maybe just try to retool in 2025 and come back stronger for 2026.
It's tough because they did kind of go all in a lot last year. They traded literally their top 2 pitching prospects. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, some of the players they got are still in there. Brian Hoeing, Jason Adam being still there. But that's a lot for relievers. And now you don't necessarily have those. It's not necessarily about them starting for your team. It's more those are assets that you could have used. I mean, I don't think they could have done it, but let's say, could you go out there and make a trade for Garrett Crochet maybe if you still have some of those pieces you gave up at the trade deadline last year? Maybe. I don't personally think so, but it's possible, right? So the Padres are in a position where they're like a bottom-ranked farm system. That doesn't mean that they're totally a mess because, frankly, I don't know about you. I don't care where they rank the Padres farm system. They keep regenerating it enough to be able to make – they've made like 8 trades since I've been hosting the show that are pretty big. So, like, they'll figure it out, and they've got really 2 quality top guys, but they just need depth. They need assets. They need ammo in the chamber to be prepared, and – I don't like tooting my own horn, but this is why, like, I'm always very cautious with the Padres that, yes, the Manny contract is fun. Tatis, the 2020, and then having his big deal. But you don't want to overcommit to now, because then players like Roki Suzaki come around. Players like, and I know that he's not based on money the same way other players are, but other interesting Garrett Crochets come around. You just like to have options because things change, guys. Jake Cronenworth was a top 5 second baseman for 2 years. You know what I mean? Like these are things that change, and I'm not saying that Tatis will get worse, but stuff happens in sports, and people like to project and go by numbers, and then the season starts and they're like, I can't believe blank. It's like, well, yeah, dude, like we you know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, Michael Harris sounds great. Had a below 100 WRC plus this year. Vinny Pasquantino, guess what? Things change. Other players spend so much time. This is their job to figure out weaknesses in other players. There are things you can't account for just because you go on Fangraphs a lot, right? So that's my thing.
Was that shot at the nerds? Dang, was that shot at the nerds just now?
I think it's a shot at the nerds who get really, really, really arrogant about what will happen. I have a friend who, you'll like this, who was like, what the heck are you thinking? When someone ranked Vinny Pasquantino behind Christian Walker. And their reasoning was basically like, I like Vinny, but sample size. Christian Walker's done it for long. He's like, no, man, you don't understand. Like this sample size, right? Like this always put. And guess what happened? And I still like Vinny. I still like Vinny. But sometimes things don't happen that way, guys. Like sometimes it's actually okay for people to have different opinions based on a variety of factors. So, you know, just keep that in mind, folks. That's a life lesson too, perhaps.
His expected Waba Slaba was 300 points above average. Oh man. Yeah, sometimes it's
and
like,
sometimes they're right. Like Cody Bellinger, great example. Like,
right.
guess what? They were right. Bellinger was a fluke.
It's just like, I can look at the traditional numbers. If you do it for long enough, I'm just gonna be like, that guy's good. I don't know, but yeah. Well, speaking of guys who are good, but maybe we were surprised by their contract or the team that they went to. That's what we're going to be discussing next, because Corbin Burns to the D-backs definitely shook the ground for the NL West, shook the ground across Major League Baseball. We want to discuss, where does that rank among most surprising contracts in Major League Baseball over the last 20 years? We'll discuss that in segment number 2. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up the W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It's thrilling. My favorite thing to do on the FanDuel Sportsbook app is the same game parlay. When I see that Arizona Cardinals are playing, sometimes I like to do a little Cardinals money line. Give me a little James Conner over on rushing touchdowns, and give me Kyler Murray anytime touchdown. When that 3-leg hits, it brings a big smile to my face. So if you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more at FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, back here on the Locked On Diamondbacks, Locked On Padres crossover. And, of course, with the Corbin Burns signing to the D-backs, as we said, was an earthquake across Major League Baseball, where we were all surprised. And D-backs fans were surprised. D-backs reporters were surprised, because everyone literally said this came together in a few days with no prior meetings, really no prior mentions or reportings or anything. Really came out of nowhere. So we had to bring Javier on to now do a little discussion, do a little draft of maybe the most surprising contracts of the last 20 years. We've discussed some of the worst contracts in Major League Baseball before. We've done some of the best values, I believe, but now we're doing the most surprising, whether it's the value that the player got, you're like, whoa, that guy got that much money, or whether it's like, oh my God, that guy just left the Yankees to go to like the Minnesota Twins. Well, like, why did he do that? So we're going to draft the most surprising contracts and see where Corbin Burns lands in our draft. Javi, I'm actually going to start it off for us, because I want to do a little bit of cheating for our draft, because we're mostly going to be drafting players today. But the first one I want to actually draft is not a player. It's actually a class, because when I think about free agency growing up, this is like the class that always sticks out to me. This is like the class where I'm like, oh, we got new blood, new contenders in Major League Baseball. The 2011 class saw the LA Angels spend big money on Albert Pujols, big money on CJ Wilson. You saw the Detroit Tigers go out there, who weren't a playoff team for many years, just wasting Miguel Cabrera. They went out there, dropped 9-year bag on Prince Fielder. You saw the Miami Marlins out of nowhere. They said, let's go get Jose Reyes. Let's go get Heath Bell. This was like the year of all these teams who were mediocre for years, just going all in on these big time free agents. And as a kid, I was like, the winter meetings are lit. Look at Pujols. Look at Reyes. Just got Mark Burley was going to Miami Marlins. Like, these teams were loading up on these star players during free agency. Now, did it work out for like any of those teams? The Tigers instantly became one of the best teams in the American League. The Angels continued to be one of the worst. The Miami Marlins continued to be one of the worst, but it was at least a fun exercise where you got to see all these new contenders. It wasn't just the big markets anymore. Felt like we finally start to see a little bit of a shift in Major League Baseball. It was like, hey, I'm a big market team. I want to go spend some money. I want to get elite free agent. Let me go do that. Did it work out for those teams? Probably not, but at least a fun free agent class. And I want our MLB free agency to get back to where it was in 2011.
Hey, man, that's a great call. I vaguely like remember the feeling of being like, wait, what's going on here? Now it happened. Now this was obviously later for the Padres, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of when the Padres started doing their trade palooza in like 2015, which was this is the Matt Kemp, Justin Upton, Craig Kimbrell, Will Myers, where everyone's like, excuse me, what are the Padres doing? Like, that's when they kind of went on the map. And I feel like that's, AJ Preiller's first like real time in charge. So now that was a little bit different. Those were trades and whatnot. But yeah, it was just like, what is this team doing? Like, who do they think they are? Dare I say? Great pick, man. I think, 2011 was just, remember 2011, man?
Yeah, so not a player, but I was just surprised because I was like, look at all these teams spending money. It was a great time. But if you have a player for me, Javi, I know I cheated a little bit there, so you could bring us back to reality here.
Yeah, I got you. I mean, I just mentioned the Padres, so let's start off with the obvious one. Manny Machado signing with the Padres. Originally, the first contract, I should say. This was, and don't get me wrong, I know that like that might sound weird maybe to some people who are a little bit newer to following the sport and whatnot, and I understand that they had signed Eric Hosmer at this time, but as you mentioned, teams have signed like whatever players and like overshot before that aren't very good, right? Like you could look all the time. I have another one on my list that signed with the Rockies, for example, but Manny Machado, like at that time, this is a young, like I think he was 26 when he signed. This is a young superstar quality player. And he also literally just came off of a tenure with the Dodgers. So for you to go to San Diego, and I understand that they signed Hosmer, but like I said, teams have reached and paid a player, and everyone's like, yeah, I remember when blank did blank. Like that was ridiculous. But I think that this was so surprising because this was an elite talent. This is a guy that everyone's like, this guy might be a Hall of Famer, and he still might, as we've seen to this day. So I think it marked the beginning of where the Padres are right now, just this team that decided to raise their standing among MLB circles and MLB brass and discourse and whatnot. And I just think that it was huge. I mean, 10 years, I believe it was 300
crazy
million,
amount of money.
like a crazy amount of money. And then, of course, I understand he signed the extension later, but originally, I remember getting that report being like, oh my God, no, the Hosmer thing wasn't just this weird one-off that they did just to like appease fans and pretend that they care. No, like they're really doing something here. And it turned out that they were building a farm system. They were doing all sorts of stuff. It wouldn't be the last crazy signing or move that the Padres made, but I think it was the first truly crazy one. Hosmer's still wild. It still belongs on here. I still think it belongs on here, but I really do believe we've seen teams make signings like that before, where they overpay mid players and they're not very good organizations. And that's usually why. Not Harper, Machado, the Cliff Lees of the world, the Barry Bonds of the world. Not an elite top 15 player baseball. Yeah. That usually doesn't happen.
No, I think that's a great call. I had that actually in my top 5 as well, because like you said, I mean, Hosmer was on the Royals going to the Padres. That felt like a move that kind of made sense where those two franchises were at that time, because let's not forget, looking at the Padres franchise history from before their postseason debut in 2020, they had not made the playoffs prior until 2006. So this was like a 13, 14-year drought for the San Diego Padres. So the idea of that team that hadn't made the playoffs since 06, signing one of the top 10 players in Major League Baseball to one of the largest contracts in the sport was truly shocking. And then it just started this whole avalanche of them just being super aggressive in the offseason at all these trade deadlines. So definitely agree. The Manny Machado, I had it in my top 5 because the Padres pulling off that deal at that time, especially when you go back and look at the roster prior to Machado getting there. It was not a roster that was like, oh, we're a Machado away from contending. Like, it was bad all the way around. So very shocking to see the Padres do that back in 2018. But Javi, for my next one, again, this is the last one where I'm going to cheat. I got a team for this one. The 2013 New York Yankees, I think, had a very surprising offseason because they let go Robinson Cano in free agency. They let him walk to the Seattle Mariners, who gave him that massive contract for over $200 million. And instead, the Yankees decide to spend that Cano money on a little outfielder from the Boston Red Sox called Jacoby Ellsbury. And the idea of Jacoby Ellsbury coming off this MVP season, winning the World Series with the Boston Red Sox, to go to the most evil empire, the biggest rival with the New York Yankees, and the Yankees saying, we're going to take that guy in, but let Robinson Cano, who I think at that point, 2012, 2013, was the heartbeat of the Yankees, was literally top 6 in MVP voting 4 straight years. 2009 was on the World Series team. This was one of the best players in Yankees franchise history. You let him go for that amount of money, but yet you paid the same value annually, $2 million less to Jacoby Ellsbury. I just did not understand that. I felt like they were just swapping out. They let Curtis Granderson go, but brought in Carlos Beltran the same offseason. Felt like they were just swapping in and out personalities, and it honestly sent the Yankees back just a little bit. Ellsbury, of course, was terrible, injuries, and then Cano obviously had the PEDs a few years later, but he was still a stud for the Mariners those first few seasons. So I thought the Yankees, what they were doing back in what year was this? 2013. I thought it was super surprising. Letting one of the heartbeats of your team go, Robinson Cano, and then stealing Jacoby Ellsbury from your biggest rival in the Boston Red Sox.
That was nuts. I think the key thing is the Boston, the fact that he was the Red Sox. That's just so crazy. And it was, I think when that happened, it was peak. This is what I think. It's not the hardest job, clearly, in baseball, GM wise, but I think it can be difficult to be hey, we want you to spend, but not too much. You have to compete every year, but not super compete with the new ownership for the Yankees. And they were basically just sign best players available. And best players available were that offseason, Brian McCann, Jacoby Ellsbury, Masahiro Tanaka. Some turned out better than others. But yeah, the Ellsbury contract really was wild. And it just felt desperate. You know what I mean? It felt like you were we're losing Cano and we got to do something to excite the fan base. So he's the best one available. And it was clearly them reaching too much as it turned out.
I don't know why they just didn't pay Cano. That's where I'm just lost with the whole thing. Why didn't they paid Jacoby Ellsbury $2 million annually less? Just pay Cano, who's been a stud for 12 straight years for you guys.
It's that. I will say the Robinson Cano didn't age amazingly. They were right about that. Right? After he went to the Mariners, he had some pretty good seasons, a 5-win season, 2.8 season, 6.4. Then it was 2.9, 2.9, 1.1. So he never fully got back. Maybe that stays. Maybe if he stays with the Yankees, it's a little bit better. So I think that they were right in saying we don't want to sign a guy like that too long at second base. It doesn't have a good history, and he did decline. But it doesn't make sense to then go out and sign all those other guys, right? It's well, how about you just get the one
maybe
player?
the process is right for Cano. But then it's okay, let's spend on the speedster who's aging.
It's never made sense.
That doesn't make any sense.
I don't know what they've been doing for a while. They keep doing this. They keep saying we want to be a little bit normal, but then they do that for other teams. So yeah, very, very, very bizarre signing. And since we mentioned it, Robinson Cano, frankly, with the Mariners, that was pretty shocking. The fact that the Mariners got him out of all teams, a team that never spends, really, that was big. And frankly, they haven't since. In a lot of ways, the Robinson Cano contract was this is the opposite of the Padres, where the Padres thing was a sign and a confirmation that they were changing how they were operating as a small market team. Mariners was a little bit of a foe, right? Or whatever, a red herring, right? It turns out, they just did that. And then that was kind of it. And then they've been chilling ever since. So that's just how it goes. But that's just another one to throw in there.
Yeah, that the Cano one was definitely crazy. And the Mariners are a team like right now that needs to spend money on offense. They have like a 6-man rotation with no lineup. Like if Cano is a free agent right now, they should do the deal again because they
Yeah,
just
right.
need somebody to pair with Julio. Like I was like actually looking at like international stats like yesterday, and Cano was like top 10 or something in like home runs among like non-major league baseball players at like age 42 last year or something. And like
My
I don't
man
know.
loves ball. He loves ball,
Yeah.
dude.
He's still going, which is crazy to see. I'll throw out one more contract before we wrap up segment number 2. It was one that you hinted on already, and it's with another NL West team. It's a team that's been in the bottom of the basement the last few years, and this deal did not help them at all. Chris Bryant, 7
Yep.
for 182 to the Colorado Rockies, where you trade Arenado, you let Trevor Story walk. It feels like your franchise are rebuilding, and then it's like, hey, let's go out there and get Chris Bryant, who is definitely not as good as his MVP days, but let's pay him like he is. Don't know why they did this. This has been a dumpster fire organization the last 20 years. As I say, Bud Black, their manager, is the worst in the sport, considering he has over 20 years as a manager, has never topped more than 90 wins, has done it twice with, I believe, one playoff victory, I think, in his whole managerial career. Maybe the worst resume of all time. Good job, Rockies. Chris Bryant, exciting stuff.
Fans still love going to their games now. I
Great
won't
time.
explain why, but I think people in Colorado are just perhaps happy a lot. They're just chilled out a lot, and they've surpassed our very primitive view of things. Miller, you have to understand. Like they decided it's not about wins or losses, man. Like they've advanced past that as a society. I think in Colorado. I still can't believe that happens. Like, do you remember when the reports were coming out? We were like, that's funny. And then we're like, wait a minute. Because it didn't just like pop one day. Like there were rumors that they were like, yeah, I mean, it's close to home. It's close to Vegas and all that stuff or whatever. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's funny. And it's like, oh, wow, the Rockies are really, oh my God. Oh my God. Like it was like a slow incline to reality. And then it happened. And I was like, you mentioned it though. I think the biggest aspect is you got to throw out there. You traded Arenado for nothing, and then you signed another player for more. Like it just fundamentally doesn't make any sense, and it's very weird. I mean, we talked at the beginning of this offseason, the Yusei Kikuchi signing for the Angels. These teams that are like clearly not good enough and actually should just kind of stay back and be like, because unless you want to do what the Rangers did, which is like really throw a lot of money, DeGrom and even some guys like that pitcher that they have, I always forget about, who gets some strikeouts, who was from Colorado once upon a time. But him, and then Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, unless you do that, you should probably just scale back and sign mini little deals for players and then just start rebuilding. But it's like they're hell-bent on being a 70-win team. It's like they can't. They're like the Indiana Pacers or the Miami Heat. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're like, no, we refuse to ever rebuild. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very, very odd, man.
They are married to being mediocre, and we just don't know why when they actually have some decent talent in that lineup. We like the Tovars, we like the McMahons. I do like Nolan Jones. It's just like, can you figure out the pitching? Can you get a better manager? But we all know what the real issue is. It's the same problem that you see with every inept franchise from baseball to basketball. Name your sport. Bad ownership. It always starts at the top and always trickles down. The Rockies owner is one of the worst in baseball. Until you swap him out, it's going to be the same old story for the Rockies. Now, I got a few more contracts I want to break down because we still haven't placed Corbin Burnes in our ranking just yet. So we'll discuss where he falls in segment number 3. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Times, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called all-in pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, back here in the Locked On Diamondbacks, Locked On Padres crossover to discuss the most surprising contracts of the last 20 years. We discussed the 2011 class. I cheated a little bit because it was surprising to see the Angels, Tigers, and Marlins get crazy. Talked about the Manny Machado contract to the Padres, 10 for 300. We talked about the 2013 New York Yankees, what they were doing, letting Cano go, but bring in Jacoby Ellsbury, the Boston Red Sox, and then just discuss Kris Bryant to the Rockies, 7 for 182. What do you want to throw out next, Javi? And maybe we go a little bit quicker because we are running out of time here.
We are indeed running out of time, so I'm going to throw out really quickly another one with the Rockies, Daniel Bard. I still can't believe this happens. I still cannot believe that the very like Disney movie type of storyline where this guy comes back after all those injuries, has a really great season, all-star, but at like 36 years old, and instead of trading him like every other team would do and say, this is relievers, they're volatile, teams need relievers down the stretch to compete for a World Series, they extend him, doesn't go well the next year, and now he's just like not pitching. Like I know it's not nearly as like impactful as the others, but I still can't believe that. That's insane. And then I'll throw out one other before I toss it to you. You know, I'll throw out two at a time. That's what we should do. We should do two at a time. A manager. I can't believe this happened either. Craig Counsell leaving the Brewers for the Cubs. That was wild. I'm sorry. Like, that doesn't happen, like, at all. I don't remember the last time that a manager was like, I see ya. Like, I'm going to go get paid. I mean, good for him. But it's still wild that it was in division. And also wild that the Brewers made the playoffs and they did it. Yeah. So, crazy.
Yeah, I think the biggest surprise is people acting like the Cubs just picked up, like, I don't know, Babe Ruth to manage their team. I couldn't even think, like, Terry Francona mixed with, like, Bill Belichick. I'm just going across the board. Mixed with Phil Jackson to go manage the Cubs. Like, they were acting like he was going to add, like, 50 wins to that ball club this year. It's like, Craig Counsell is good, but as you can see with the Brewers, maybe it's more organizational than just one guy that's making up all their wins for them. So definitely like that call. For me, I'll go with some contracts I still haven't talked about. Let's see. For me, I still think some of the big ones, of course, the first Dbacks big pitcher contract, Zach Greinke, I thought it was huge. 6 for 206, the original franchise record-breaking deal, because he was coming off a true Cy Young season, didn't win it, but coming off a Cy Young type season with the LA Dodgers. The Dbacks are also a team that hadn't made the playoffs the 4 prior seasons, coming off like a mid-70 win team. Like, again, it was one of those moves where, like, this was not a team exactly ready to go to the next level, and they said, screw it, we're going to throw the money at Zach Greinke anyway. So I thought that move was like the 4th biggest surprise to me personally on my ranking. I had the 2011 thing, the 2013 Yankees, I had Kris Bryant 3, Greinke 4, I had your Machado thing 5. Number 6 on my list, I have Anthony Rendon to the LA Angels, because it was just another example of the Angels looking at their team and saying, hey, we have maybe the worst rotation in baseball, the worst ERA, maybe the worst bullpen. We have Ohtani, we have Albert Pujols, we have there was like 2 other decent dudes in their lineup. You know what? Let's just double down on our strength instead of just ignoring our glaring weaknesses, and let's just throw 7 years, 245 at Anthony Rendon. He's like still a top 5 highest paid player in the sport, and he has done exactly nothing, mostly due to injuries, but also poor performance. So also had to just throw that one out there. And then after Rendon, I actually think Corbin Burns on my personal list, 7th most surprising contract, I think, of like the last 20 years on my little personal list. And actually number 8 was maybe your guy, Javi. I'll throw him out as an honorable mention, but I did write down Xander Bogaerts, 11 for 280. Not because I was surprised to see him go to the Padres, but 11 years, 280 for Bogaerts.
Contract size. Yeah, the contract size was surprising. Yeah. Like, looking back, like, that looked like a player that should have got like what Dansby Swanson got. Maybe he gets to 200 just because he had bigger moments with the Red Sox and all that, but pretty crazy that the bidding was at like 175 and all of a sudden the Padres came in with 280. Like, really
I
wild.
Fine with that. If you got like a 8 for 180,
the Dansby Swanson contract is the perfect comp, right? Like, that just, it makes sense. I'm with you on that. I actually would not necessarily. It's funny how the Angels like have all these deals and like they still are surprising every time. I don't know why. Like, we keep seeing them do it, but like, would you be that surprised if they went and signed Pete Alonso? I wouldn't be. If they just overpaid, like, it would be such an Angels thing. Like, yeah, it will be surprising in the moment, but we just know they, for some reason, will never do the right thing, right? Like, I don't know what it is. Some others for me. Do you remember Billy Butler signing with the Oakland A's? 3 years, 30 million. At the time, though, like the biggest deal. It was just so random. Like, I remember it happened in the middle of class for me in high school. That one was really random. I'll throw out Severino, frankly, from this offseason to the A's. That was random. And now I think that one's surprising, but then when you dig deep and you're like, oh, he's trying to pretend because they're having he needs to make it look like he's going to invest in team. So it's like when you peel it back, you're like, actually, that's not that surprising if you think about it. But still in the moment, it's still out there.
Yeah, and with the Severino thing too, kind of on my list, I paired it with the Benintendi signing because I just thought it's surprising that the fact that's the two biggest contracts in like each of those respective franchises history, which is like Benintendi and Severino, the two biggest free agents you've ever signed. Like that's the surprise right there.
If you weren't at us for Billy Butler, don't be on us when it was Luis Severino. Some OG ones. Alex Rodriguez to the Rangers was wild when it happened. I just know people who were, I wasn't following baseball as intently outside like my division back then, but that was pretty wild that he signed with the Rangers specifically because they were bad. So that it was Angels before the Angels, really. They were bad. That's why they ended up having to move him. Pudge Rodriguez, my Puerto Rican king, to the Detroit Tigers, by all accounts, genuinely out of nowhere. Nobody could believe it when that contract happens. I want to give a shout out to Pablo Sandoval, speaking of Pudgy, with the Boston Red Sox. That was wild. I don't know why they did that. He was always just a solid, fun player who was more fan favorite than actual on-field great. Edwin Encarnacion to the Guardians. I remember when that happened. That was pretty exciting. 3 years, $60 million. By Guardian standards, that's like the Rendon contract, right? Like that's pretty nuts. Andres Jimenez. I think the Andres Jimenez extension when it happened was pretty wild. It was like, oh my God. And I know they have new ownership and now they're still being cheap, but it's pretty wild. Like that's a big time extension. So I'd give that out there as well. And a little bit Ohtani to the Angels only because they were not one of the teams being constantly reported. Right. That's the only reason, because we got so many reports from other teams. I think the Cubs were out there. The Mariners were out there. Dodgers were out there. Yankees were out there big time. The famous call by Mike Francesa that it will be the worst decision they ever make if they sign Shohei Ohtani. Good job.
Good job.
Congratulations, my dude. But yeah, those are some that come to mind. But dude, I cannot emphasize enough. If you weren't there, it doesn't sound right. But the Billy Butler contract was so random for big baseball nerds like myself. We were like, what? And it's also the biggest deal they've ever given. God bless baseball, man. Just incredible stuff.
Man, I forgot about Billy Butler for a second. He was a B. Actually, looking at his numbers that now is like, man, he was 300 and like 800 plus OPS for like 4 or 5 straight seasons there.
He was a good player. He was a good player. It was just very weird that the A's did it. Everyone was like, wait, why? Like, you guys aren't, I don't think you guys are contenders really, but he had some like decent, he was a good DH. You know what I mean? He was a good DH player when you used him that way, because he just could not play defense to save his life. He had some pretty good years with the Royals, and then all of a sudden, sides with Oakland, falls apart even more, and then never plays again.
That's so, man. Just stop signing with Oakland if you want to continue your career. Maybe that's a lesson.
Another D-back real quick, Mike Hampton. Now, it makes a little bit of sense when it happens. He was very good. ERA by year, he never had an ERA above 3.59 or 3.7. Signs with the Rockies for an enormous deal. Let me just pull it up right here. 8 years, 121 when this happened. ERA immediately after that skyrocket to 5.4, 6.15 the year after that, and then goes to Atlanta, somewhat gets redeemed there, and then he's in the minors for a bunch of years, still getting paid by the Rockies. Like, that was weird, and I think it was one of those contracts that at the time, from what I gather, I wasn't there necessarily when it happens, like, Coors Field is just a cruel mistress. You know what I mean? Like, there are some guys that, like, are just not going to fit there. And this was the type of guy who pitched for soft contact. That's not going to work at Coors. So that's what happened there. But yeah, man, we've had a lot of surprising deals. I think we're due for one more, man. I'm not saying Corbin Burns level. And by the way, your team is terrifying, and we have to talk about that on another podcast. How much the Rockies are going to win like 96 games next year.
Who's the player that you think would get the surprising contract? Then I have
Alonso. I think I can see a world where Alonso is like, man, I'm getting paid, and I don't care where. right? I think that he's one profar a tiny bit.
A little bit.
Only because I could see, what if there's a team out there that's like, you know what, it wasn't a fluke. We're going to give him 4 years, 75, something like that. We're going to overpay, whatever. But I don't know. There's something about Alonso, man. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about home run, go boom. You know what I mean? Anytime a guy hits a lot of home runs, always be prepared for teams to be like, let's just throw a lot of money out there. Who cares? This is fun for fans.
Yeah, for me, I think it's Alex Bregman, just because I feel like he's attainable by almost any team. I feel like any team willing to throw the bag at Bregman will willing to at least listen to the offer and maybe go there. So I think there's going to be like a mid-market, like another Minnesota Twins with a Carlos Correa, like some team that you don't expect to come out, maybe like a Detroit Tigers, and say, here's 10 years, $280 million for Bregman, and let's bring you home. So I think he would be the guy that I look at as maybe the most surprising contract they get from another team. I'll throw out just a quick honorable mentions. Carlos Correa, like I said. DeGrom to the Rangers, 5 for $185. We thought it was surprising just because of the age and injuries, mid-30s. And then just a fun one personally for me, when Lucas Giolito signed with the Boston Red Sox last year. 2 for $40, coming off the top, when he's going to miss the whole season due to Tommy John. How can you get him?
He's coming back this year, right?
He should be coming back, but he signed him last year when he was missing the whole year for $20 million. It's like, yeah, he might come back this year, but it's like, I'm paying him 2 years for maybe a half season of baseball. It's like, I just didn't understand that move whatsoever. It's like, now you have like 5 starters already in your rotation better than Giolito with Bueller. You got Crochet, Hogg, Bello, even got Patrick Sandoval. It's like, where's Giolito going to play now? So just a terrible deal by the Boston Red Sox that I just had to mention before we wrap up today.
I understand, man. I understand. There's probably some we've missed, so feel free to leave some comments, especially like the little small ones, like your Billy Butler ones, because I think those are like really fun, because in the moment they were pretty wild. Chris Davis a little bit with the Orioles when he signed that extension, that was pretty big, but I don't know. He was coming off like 50 home runs, so wasn't that surprising? Not really. There's a difference between bad contract and surprising contract. You know what I mean? So let's keep with surprising, but yeah, man, not much else for me.
Some of them weren't. Some of them we didn't know were bad until we had like the hindsight a couple years later. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that dude, like Chris Davis at the time was like, yeah, he had like 100 home runs in like a 2-year span. It's like, okay, we could kind of justify giving him like a big deal, and then he ended up just being the worst strikeout artist of all time immediately after that.
I'll never forget that, my lord.
It was actually kind of fun to see, because like one season it was like we were watching like every at bat on SportsCenter to see if he was going to hit like 60 plus home runs. It was like the next year it was like, man, is he going to have like another like 4 strikeout game? It was just like the juxtaposition of the 2 seasons that you saw on SportsCenter was a lot of fun. But that was our little draft of the worst contracts, or not worst, the most surprising contracts in baseball of the last 20 years. Like I said, I think Corbin Burnes ranks 7th on my personal list of biggest surprises. I still have it behind Greinke to the D-backs, because at least the D-backs right now, they've been aggressive the last couple of years. They've been a good team the last couple of years. Like they've been making moves. Like it's not a total. It was just the fact that there was like no reported, but it's not a surprise that the D-backs went out there and got a premier free agent.
Yeah, you peel it back. Right?
Yeah. Back when they got Greinke, it was like, why are the D-backs even doing this? They have no other players on their team, no other resources except for Zach Greinke all of a sudden. So that was a big surprise back then. Javi, where can the listeners find you online and on social media?
You can find me at Javapeno on Twitter /X and Blue Sky, especially the latter. I feel like I'm going to be using that more in the coming weeks and days and months. What?
Don't do it.
He said, don't do it. I'll tell you why after this show. But go check that out, and especially go subscribe to Just Baseball. I write there a lot, and then also check out our newsletter. We'll give you like updates and all the things you need to know when the signings happen, and I've been working on that as well. So go check that out. Just Baseball, great website. And yeah, stay tuned. Still a lot of signings to happen. Still a lot of trades to happen. So a lot of stuff this offseason, man. Very exciting.
Yeah, and I would still like to bring in a couple of Padres free agents myself. Profar is still a guy that I would, depending if the money's right, could play all over the infield. We need a little DH. I would not be upset at all. Please follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks, Twitter and Instagram. And also subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks wherever you stream podcasts. And of course, subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks, Locked On Padres on YouTube. Until next time, until we get more big news between our 2 teams, that's it for this little crossover between Locked On Diamondbacks, Locked On Padres. Doses. Uh-oh.